got an echo, so I'm just going to put.
Okay, Rob, we're recording. Thanks.
Yeah, you can start recording. Participants.
Yeah, here we go.
That's fine.
I'll grab some more
So
water.
can you
there,
see
Steve.
from there, Jeff?
Grab
Yeah.
Arvin.
So guys, a special l'chaim for Harry Murrells. We lost Harry Murrells last week.
Was he the chap that used to sit
He used to come sit here. He lived in the complex
opposite.
Yeah. It was on the group.
Was on the group.
Was.
I'm thinking twice if I should die one day. When did he pass away?
No, he was. It was on the group.
Only
fact, Kenny and two
only
others
Mark
put both
Kenny
in. Yeah,
that
yeah.
is Not,
Yeah, but he knew about
oh,
it.
you're feeling better there, Mark.
Sure. Welcome.
Once you fully got out of trouble, haven't seen you in a while.
We have out for
Okay, so
many years. 30 years.
has everyone got the place?
Because I moved to Glen Hazel more than 30 years ago. And you came, which is something from my home in Killarney.
70 around 70.
And your car was stolen.
Fine. Well, hold on,
Just paint you one ice. I'll send the ice that way. You got it. Yeah, thank you. Has everybody got a place? Those that are not following on the screen.
The best for me. Well, I've got Black Label, I've got the famous guys, I've got Universe, I've got
Has everyone got a place?
Which one do you want? It's all Ella Huh? Jameson.
Gentlemen, time to learn. Has everybody got the place?
Yeah.
5. Yeah, 47. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm just going to read 2 or 3 lines. 2 or 3 lines from the old stuff, just so that we can catch some of the context. Yeah, special welcome to Arnold. It's been a few years since we. Shem, I remember when Sergio passed away, you came for a few weeks in his honor. Do you remember that? Yeah. That was 2018. Actually, it was Tammuz 2018, so that would be 6 years ago.
Sure.
Yeah. His yahrzeit was just a few weeks ago, 19th of Tammuz. Yeah.
He was.
Really? Is that so? Really?
First time in Argentina.
He was also Argentinian.
You had to turn it off somewhere at the top of the phone. I don't know what we are following, Rabbi, so you would see.
It's fine if you want to follow.
Okay.
Okay.
We did it for my mom and her sister.
Okay, so we have in mind Marvin's mom. Daniela Baila Bat Yaakov Ruben.
And Shulamit Bat Yaakov.
And Shulamit Bat Yaakov Ruben.
And mother-in-law.
No, following here.
Your mom-in-law. What's it? Yosef and Menucha? Bas Esther. And for the soldiers and the hostages and the Jewish people everywhere in the world and all our friends, whoever supports us, they can also have a bracha.
Any missions that
Amen.
Famous Bacher, Hezbollah.
Yeah. Amen. Should be good times.
And I think they've finished. They basically have finished off Hamas almost.
Yeah.
It's on the tears of finishing it all.
Sure. Halavai. Yeah, please God. So I just backtracked a little bit, and then just to read 1 or 2 lines, and then we'll go forward again. That the subject matter of this Gemora Avodah Zarah, which funny enough fits in with this week's Parsha. If you look at the first section of this week's Parsha, Re'eh has verses which tell us that when our people would come into the land of Canaan, that's what it was called at that time, that we should destroy their altars. We read it this morning in Shul, and the Asherah trees have to be burnt in fire. And and
Need to switch off
the Avodah Zarah,
volume.
all of the Avodah Zarah had to be destroyed. And we spoke a bit about the Isur Hana, the prohibition, that we're not allowed to have benefit from Avodah Zarah, that we spoke about to some degree. Then we also started to speak about what happens if you want to use, what happens if you want to use something for a dvar mitzvah, for a mitzvah purpose or a holy purpose? Maybe it's different to a common purpose. These were the different ideas that the Gemora was weighing up. In other words, they're all different levels of disqualification or prohibition in use of something that has been worshipped. One is common use meaning common, ordinary person's use for our own purposes. And then there's the question of using something for a mitzvah. That's what we touched on last week. Like if you take a branch from a palm tree and you want to use it for a lulav, that's not common use, that's mitzvah use. If you take a horn from a sheep and you want to use it to make a shofar, or leather from an animal as parchment for a mezuzah, or as parchment for a mezuzah, or alternatively for anything else, then you are utilizing it for a mitzvah purpose. And that's what we read last week. I'm just going to read the first 2 lines of last week, and then we'll scroll forward to this week. Boy, Resh Lakish asked, where's the annotate thing? Oh, there he is. Oops. It's this thing. Okay, yeah. Boy, Resh Lakish asked, if a person worships a palm tree, what is the status of the lulav in the palm tree? Do we say that you can still use those lulav branches as a lulav? Or has that person, by bowing down to the tree, disqualified the tree and its contents, which includes the lulav branch? And the Gemora unpacked it. So I'm not going to read every single part of last week's. But what happened was, towards the end, yeah, there we go, I'm in the right place. The Gemora said that the whole thing rotates around a principle. It's always important to catch the principles or the formulas. That the whole thing revolves around the principle, yesh dichui eitzel mitzvah se'ein dichui, meaning, is there disqualification by mitzvahs or not? You know, you're coming out of Olympics now, so people think often about disqualification. What happens if somebody does something which causes them to be either temporarily disqualified from a tournament or maybe permanently disqualified, depending on what they did or what happened? So in a like sort of way, the Gemora was discussing what happens if something becomes disqualified for the purpose of a mitzvah. For instance, if you're going to say that the branches in the palm tree got disqualified for the purpose of the mitzvah of lulav, because of the fact that somebody worshipped it, because of the fact that somebody worshipped it, it became disqualified. So what about afterwards, if the status of the tree as Avodah Zarah is revoked, does that disqualification stay in place or does it not stay in place? You have a palm tree, the guy that sells lulavim wants to be able to use them. Somebody came along and worshipped it. He did Avodah Zarah with the tree. So initially, those branches were disqualified. You couldn't use them for the mitzvah. Then the status of the tree was, as Avodah Zarah was revoked. The non-Jew, whoever it was that was worshipping the tree, came along and said, we learned that they have the power to revoke the status of Avodah Zarah. So he came and he revoked it. He said, I'm no longer going to serve that tree as a deity, as idol worship. Can we now come and utilize those palm branches or not? In other words, the fact that the Mishnah, the mitzvah was disqualified, is that disqualification permanent or is it temporary? Can it be considered to be passing? So, can it be what we call a mumayver? In other words, a problem that passes by. And then the Gemara brought an example just at the last part of the piece that we did last week. It started to speak about kisui hadam, It was a very, how would you call it? Technical comparison. The concept that when we shecht certain kinds of animals, undomesticated animals and fowl, we have a mitzvah of kisui adam, that the blood has to be covered when the animal is slaughtered. So the blood squirts down on the ground, and the Jew has an obligation to take sand, dust, ashes, some kind of powdery substance, and cover the blood and make a bracha. And this mitzvah is called kisui adam ba'afar, covering the blood with sand. And there was a discussion, Rav Papa brought it down. There was a discussion which said, what happens if there was automatic covering, if the wind or the weather or some elements came and blew dust over the blood? So you, the Jew, were supposed to do the mitzvah, but your mitzvah got done for you because some dust got blown over the blood. And we said that if that's the case, then you don't have your mitzvah anymore because the dust blew on it itself. But if it blows off again, then it would seem that you are mechuyev, you're obligated to do the mitzvah. In other words, you don't have to worry about kisui hadam because the wind came and blew dust naturally and covered the blood. So there's no mitzvah, but also the purpose of the mitzvah, which was to cover the blood, was taken away.
Well, you do like Bishul Lakum.
Sorry?
You do like Bishul Lakum. You put some soil also. So
Right.
you made a mitzvah.
So interestingly, they didn't say you have to do that. On the contrary, they said that because the wind brought the dust, it's enough. But if the wind takes away the dust, then you have an obligation to do it again. In other words, the mitzvah was not permanently removed. The mitzvah was only temporarily removed. Rav Papa tried to compare the two. He tried to say, does it mean that if we see by kisui adam, by covering of the blood, that the mitzvah doesn't go away completely? In other words, the moment the blood becomes uncovered, another wind comes and blows the dust the other way. The blood's now uncovered. You now have your mitzvah back again. The mitzvah that was dichui, that was poured, comes from the expression of doche in Hebrew. That was pushed off, comes back again. It's not permanently disqualified. It comes back again. So maybe the same thing with the tree. That once upon a time last week they were worshipping the tree. So the mitzvah of lulav is disqualified off those branches. You can't use the branches for a lulav. But maybe when they revoke the idolatrous status of the tree, the mitzvah comes back again. Does it stay away or does it not stay away? And that's what the Gemora was assessing at the end of last week's piece. And the Gemora said that we can't come to a conclusion on this. We have a few pieces of Gemora in the recent ones where it says that teiku, that means the dilemma remains unresolved. And because the dilemma remains unresolved, if you look in Shulchan Aruch, if you look in Jewish law, where the codifiers of the actual law, Gemora's discussion, Gemora is not law, but if you look at the Shulchan Aruch, the Rambam, the Tur, and the places where they actually codify the law, what you'll see is they've taken a strict view because of the fact that the issue in the Gemara was unresolved. And avodah zara, serving idolatrous things, is is considered a serious thing. So if you look in halacha, it says that if you know that a tree was worshipped, a palm tree, you actually shouldn't use the branches for a lulav. It does say that, but if somebody did it, they probably fulfilled the mitzvah. They were yotzei, but that means after the fact. Lechatchila, which means as a first choice, you shouldn't go and use such a lulav. But after the fact, had you used such a lulav, it would be okay, because it wasn't necessarily permanently disqualified, but it all came about as a result of the fact that in the discussion in the Gemara, it was unresolved. There are certain views also that said that it depends on when the status of the tree as an idol worshipping tree was revoked. If the status of the tree was revoked prior to Yom Tov, then after the fact, you could say that lulav would still get the person through the mitzvah. Or the horn, if it came from an animal that was served as a avodah zara, would get us through the mitzvah of blowing shofar. But there is a view that if the guy only revoked the status of that animal or that tree on Yom Tov itself, and then somehow somebody managed to take that horn, I guess the guy was the one who slaughtered it and pick it up and use it as a shofar, that wouldn't be good enough. If it happened on Yom Tov itself, that the status of the tree or the status of the animal was changed and revoked from being avodah zara, then there's a view that wouldn't help at all, that whoever used that shofar to blow Rosh Hashanah, whoever used that lulav on Sukkot wouldn't have done the mitzvah at all. It would be invalid.
Didn't you say it had a sha'ar of kashrus?
Sorry?
So even after, let's say the cancels the Zorah of the tree, let's say second day on this, and you be the third day on this. It didn't have a status of kashrus.
It could be that second day for third day is okay. The only thing is the real day you need the lulav for is actually the first day is the main day you need it for. Yeah, but it could be. So the place we got to was, it's a similar example. The Gemora says that Rav Papa asked, what about if somebody worships an animal? And in this case, we're talking about a sheep, an animal that produces fabric. So in other words, you shear wool off the sheep. Would somebody be able to use its wool for techelet? Techelet was that special light blue color that you either have it in the tzitzis and in the talis and the tzitzis. There is also, and the Gemara is going to ask, which one do you intend? There were also certain garments for the kohanim that were made from techelet, which they used to serve their service. They had special garments which were utilized to serve their special service in the temple, in the tabernacle, which was also techelet. So Rav Papa was asking a similar question to the context of what we've been doing. You asked about a lulav in a palm tree. You asked about a horn of an animal. What about the hair of the animal or the wool of the animal for techelet? By Rav Papa, I'm reading inside now. It's line 13, I think 47. Rav Papa asked, if somebody, sorry, is it? 30, yeah. If somebody bows down to an animal, so somebody worships an animal, turns it into avodah zarah, samra maulat cheles. What is the ruling regarding using its wool for the mitzvah of light blue of techeles? And then the Gemara asks, which techeles are you talking about? Are you talking about the techelet that they used in the tabernacle for the kohanim? Or are you talking about the techelet that everybody had on their tzitzit? Says the Gemara, techelet amai, which techelet are you asking a question on? And the Gemara will unpack what the difference is between the questions. If you're talking about, can you use it for the garment of the kohanim which had to be made from light blue? Why are you asking your question again? This was the exact question of Rami Bar Chama, which was asked earlier on. A page or two ago, Rami Bar Chama was asking questions that if something was worshipped, can it be used for hektish, for the sacred offerings in the temple? And even if you want to say that you could use it for other purposes, maybe for Hashem's purposes in the temple, it's still repulsive to use it. In other words, it's a stronger question whether it can be used in the temple, which is very highly holy situation, than for a regular person, even a regular person's mitzvah. In other words, if you run the hierarchy of holiness, there's my ordinary stuff, you know what I mean? How would you call it? My snacks, my whiskey, my whatever. Then there is mitzvahs. You start to make a bracha, it's Shabbos, it's whatever. And higher than even mitzvahs is something that's literally an offering inside the temple. And the concept is, if you're talking about the garments of the kohanim inside the temple, now you're talking about the worship in the temple. So isn't that the same question that Rami Bar Chama asked a page or two ago? Why are we repeating the same question? And if you're asking about the techeles of tzitzis, that in other words, can the wool of this animal that was served be utilized to make the techeles of regular tzitzis or talis? That's the question of Resh Lakish that we've been busy with till now. Can you use the palm branches for a lulav? Can you use the ram's horn for a shofar? So now you're asking, can you use the wool of the animal for the tzitzit? It's the same question we've been dealing with. So why, in other words, what the Gemara is asking, why are we repeating the same question with just a different example? What is there to gain by a new question with the same framework, same packaging, same details? So the Gemara says, in Hachanami, you're right, the question is the same. But The truth of the matter is, the reason that he how would you call it, reran the question was because there were additional things to learn from this question. By asking this question again, over and above the questions we already asked, the Gemara is suggesting that we can shed light on new aspects which weren't covered in the previous questions. You're right, that there wasn't, how would you call it, major reason to repeat the same question. And the reason he did repeat the question, because there's other aspects in this particular question. And what are the other aspects? If you unpack it, there's more stuff than just the wool. We want to know about the wool, as we've said. What is the deal with using that wool for the mitzvah of techelet, of sky blue thread on the tzitzis? Then, furthermore, what's the story of using an animal's horns for the chatzotzros, for the trumpets in the temple? One of the things they had was trumpets, the horns that they would blow. They would blow them in Yom Tov time. They would blow them for battle. In other words, besides for the shofar and Rosh Hashanah. We read on your days of joy and your festivals, and it says, you will blow the trumpets, you'll blow the horns. And when we went to battle, we would blow horns. So we will be allowed to use the horns of an animal that are often used to blow a horn for battle or whatever it is, or even in a temple to make noise, that there were certain offerings that were accompanied with noise and instruments and music. Would that be allowed? Sometimes they would use the thighs of the animal, which basically means the bone section of the thighs, for flutes. They would be able to hollow it out so that it would be turned, it would be carved into a musical instrument that's like a flute. Could you use these parts of the animal for these instruments? Not only that, they would make string from the intestines and the innards of the animal. They would actually be able to create some kind of a string, which would be used for string instruments, like whatever was the equivalent in those days of a guitar, harps and whatever else. B'nai Me'er, the innards, could be, but here he's talking about instruments. What would the din be about using the innards of the animal to make string for stringed instruments? And the reason why these things are also important, because you can say that we've already asked similar questions. So what the Gemora wants to say is there are various degrees of holiness that we're concerned with here. There are offerings that are taking place in the temple, which includes the actual consecrated animal, the accompanying offerings, which are like the beverage libations, the wine, the mincha, the meal offerings. There's the actual sacred offerings that are brought by the Kohanim in the temple. And then there's accompanying things which might be holy, but not as holy as the main offering. So we're trying to work out which get disqualified. And the fact that something extremely holy gets disqualified doesn't mean for sure that something that's not as holy is also going to get disqualified. For example, says the Gemora, according to the opinion that says that the main part of the music was with a kli, with a vessel, there is no question, or with an instrument. The background over here is as follows. When they would bring the offerings, there was a lot of musical accompaniment that used to take place. There was a whole orchestra of stuff that used to go on. The Levites would sing, and some of the Levites, some of the Leviim also played instruments. You had a whole concert going on. So besides for Kohanim bringing offerings right inside the most sacred area of the temple, you had a whole fanfare going on, a whole happy, rejoicing fanfare going on, where other people, there was a backup performance, a backup team of people. And in this backup team of people, the Levites, the Leviim, were singing and playing instruments. In fact, non-Levites, the Yisraelim, were also allowed to play instruments, although it was only the Leviim that sang. The singing, the choir, so to speak, the choristers, was in that zone near the offerings, was, how would you call it, the exclusive domain of the Leviim. The Leviim were, we say it in our davening, It was the Levim who would sing and they would say, and they would offer the tunes. In the Beit HaMikdash. The people who played instruments, the concert people that played instruments, that could even be Israelites as well. But the musical, how would you call it, accompaniment of the offerings consisted of a mixture of singing and live instruments. So there was music from instruments and there was music from people singing. It was a synthesis. It was a mixture of both. Now the question over here is, there's an argument where the rabbis talk about what was the most important part. Are we getting that?
Sorry, I need to disconnect the sound.
Oh yeah, I can mute it. It's fine. What was the most important part of this musical situation? Was it the singing or was it the music? And the reason why we want to know this is if the musical instruments was important as well, then it's part of the holiness and the offering, then there's less of a chance that you would be able to manufacture those instruments from those animals that were worshipped for Avodah Zarah, because the musical instruments is an integral part of the offering. It's also holy. But if you ask, we're not discussing Shabbos, we're talking about in general.
In general.
Not specifically Shabbos. But if you're going to talk about the fact, there was stuff that went on in there on Shabbos that couldn't happen in general. If you're talking about the singing, and those people that say that the singing is the main thing and the instruments wasn't as important, then maybe it doesn't matter if you make the instrument from an animal that was served. That's the case.
So it doesn't make a difference in making an instrument from an animal that what?
That was served for idolatry, that was worshipped for idolatry. In other words, your question that you were asking, his question that he was asking, that if you have an animal that some guy went and served, they went and as it happened today, there's still certain cults or religions that do that. But there were those that turned animals into deities. So we wanted to know if they did that, they worshipped an animal. Can you use that animal's components to make your instruments to be played in the temple? And is it the same as using that animal's parts for offerings? And the Gemora says it depends which opinion about the singing you're going with. There's one opinion that the instruments is an integral part of the service. Now you wouldn't have a problem. You would have a problem using those instruments because that opinion holds that the playing of instruments was an integral part of the service. It's a holy service. There's another opinion that says the instruments are just an extra. The singing of the Levites is the main thing. If that's the case, if the instruments are just an extra, in other words, a peripheral add-on, then it may not be a big deal if those instruments come from an animal that was worshipped, especially if it was revoked as Avodah Zarah.
Is that where the Chazonis comes from?
Could be. Could be.
The pause and everything else.
According to the opinion that says that the main concept of music accompanying the offerings was with instruments, there's no question. The Vadai Asir definitely prohibited. It's definitely prohibited to make instruments from an animal that was worshipped as Avodah Zarah because of the fact that the instruments are a major part of the service. Ki tibailach, when do you have a question with the other opinion? Ali, but the Manda Omar. A Manda Omar means an opinion. You know, but Jews, you can have more than one opinion sometimes. So Manda Amar means a view that says, Manda Amar, a view, a group that says, but the Manda Amar, according to the view that says, Ikashira Bapeh, that the main service, the main musical service, was the verbal side. So then the whole purpose of it was, all you're doing is sweetening the situation with the instrument. In other words, the main purpose of them standing there is the choir, is the choristers, the a cappella, whatever you want to call it. But the fact that there are instruments there is just to sweeten up the situation. And therefore you can bring them in. What's the difference if you bring these instruments in? They're not an integral part of the offering. Maybe you'll go the other way around. He's playing it like tennis and say, no, even if it's just a small contribution to the general musical repertoire, even a small contribution we don't want from an animal that was served in Avodah Zarah, even if it's a small contribution. So which do you do? So the Gemora says, Teiku. This is a question that stands unresolved. In other words, we still cannot resolve this question. We remain with a question that can you or can you not use the components of this animal that was worshipped, which means Al Pidin, we would not use it because we don't know whether or not we can. Okay, so if anybody wants to ask any other questions, because maybe we'll inside we can leave it over there.
But isn't it simple? You can't get a benefit from something that's been idolatrous.
Yeah.
So even if they did,
but we're talking about something that the status of its idolatrous status was revoked.
Oh, it was revoked.
It was revoked. The question is, does it maybe on a personal level you still can benefit because it was revoked, but we would consider it not appropriate to use it for a holy purpose. So in other words, you bring it to shul and you tell the rabbi, I brought this to shul. I know that it was once used for worship in some temple, but they revoked it. So he'd say, listen, in the shul, no. You want to use it at home, according to halacha, you can use it at home. No problem. The goyim revoked its status. It's how would you call it? You can take it, you can use it for an ornament in the house. It's not a problem for personal use, but for sacred use, and that's generally the gist. You often get long technical discussions in Gemora, and sometimes one has to extract the main thread of the discussion. And the main thread of the discussion is, like sometimes people will see a meeting or whatever, and everybody's, how would you call it, carrying on, but you catch the main nakuda, the main idea that is being either debated or whatever. And the main idea of these last few pages is what's the difference between personal use and sacred use? In other words, even in situations where we would allow personal use, what about sacred use? Is it the same thing? And that's what it's, yeah. And we will carry on from next week is the last one of these examples. If somebody decides to worship a well or a wellspring of water, what's the story with using that water again in the temple? Because there were offerings which required water. We had the Simchas Bacher Eva, and there were various offerings that required liquid. And now you find that the well or the stream that you want to use to draw water and bring it into the temple, somebody has worshipped it. The Egyptians, we know already in Mitzrayim, they worshipped the Nile. That was their god. One of their gods was the river Nile because it sustained the land. So somebody goes and worships the stream or the well. Can you draw water from that well and use it for the Nesachim, which means the beverage offerings, the libations?
What Pharaoh was doing in the water.
You're right. We know what he was doing in the water.
Let's take an example of something's worrying me. You've got over 10 animals, and he's walking with his 10 animals, and a guy a kilometer away sees the animals, and he decides maybe it's I can make a what is it?
Yeah.
Is that effective?
No, I don't think so. I'll tell you why. Because one of the conditions is that you can't really make avodah zarah on something you don't own. In other words, if I have something and somebody else comes, so let's say I bought a statue for an ornament, and some other dude decides that that's a getchker, an idol or a deity, and worships it, it's the owner of the thing that can give something a status of avodah zarah, not someone else, unless you clearly give that person a mandate. So if you're running, lahavdil, like the rabbi runs the shul, if you're running the temple and you tell the people, this belongs to me, but you can all bow down to it, I'm giving you service rights of this idol, then it's like in anything, the rights transfer and the people have the power to cause avodah zarah. Just like, for instance, if you rent something to somebody, the tenant's got rights. Yeah. And if you lease something to somebody, then that person has rights. They develop a connection with the thing that has been leased or whatever. So in other words, anywhere where a person has a mandate, has reshus, has permission to utilize it, and then they go and use it their own way, they can turn it into avodah zarah. So for instance, we had that one example a few pages back where it says, what happens if a Jew sets something up for avodah zarah and then allowed a non-Jew to come and worship it? That could cause trouble. But he had to have allowed it.
Revoke.
Yeah, because he can't revoke, exactly.